Thanks for clicking on the thumbnail. My name is Rob Lee, and welcome back to my YouTube channel. Today we're going to be coming up with some crazy ideas and some illustration. And yes, you are watching Season 1, Episode 4 of Doodlebox. For those of you who don't know what Doodlebox is, it is a series where I take 3 post-it notes at random and use them as creative prompts to create an illustration on my iPad. What are the categories inside the box? Well, I'm glad you asked. Inside, the yellow post-it notes are animals, the orange post-it notes are jobs, and the green post-it notes are different things. So, let's see what combinations we can come up with and get started. Got a yellow one over here. Now I'm going to pick out a green one. Here we go. And lastly, an orange post-it note. Okay, I've got my 3 post-it notes here, so let's unveil them, and maybe we'll do a slightly different order than what I normally do. So we'll start with the green one first. And the green post-it note I have is lunchbox. I have farmer. A spider. So as always, we have a lovely combination of creative prompts to work with. We have a spider for our animal. We have a farmer for our job. And finally, we have lunchbox as the object. Let's see what we can come up with. I was first thinking about this idea of a spider just hanging out and chilling in a farmer's lunchbox. And the farmer looking pretty incredulous and shocked that an arachnid is sitting there eating his lunch. I kind of like the angle for this first scene, the sort of from behind the spider and a look of concern on the farmer's face. So this is my first thumbnail. Wanted the spider to look like he was just lounging around inside of a spa here. In the second thumbnail, I had the spider standing up and giving some food to a farmer while they were hanging out on a cobweb, having a picnic between two very different beings here. Kind of had the farmer looking a little bit like a jelly bean here, which wasn't intentional, but this was another sort of way of representing a lunch between 2 friends. I was then exploring this idea of a lunchbox walking around like a spider, so having a lunchbox with 8 legs, with a farmer riding on top of it, dishing out fruit and other types of, I guess, edible arrangements to his customers. So I liked this idea quite a bit. It was a bit more fantastical, reminded me a lot of Miyazaki films and imagery from that style. I then start to blend the farmer and the spider together in this 4th thumbnail. Another variation of the giant spider walking around with a lunchbox out its back. So here is very similar to the 3rd thumbnail, but instead of having the lunchbox being the body, I had the spider carrying the lunchbox as a container in a carriage, and the farmer sitting on top of that, almost like a rider of an elephant or a large animal here. In the 6th thumbnail, I thought of a spider stealing or sneaking up on a farmer's lunchbox here, so have the little arachnid descending from the top of the scene and 2 farmers unsuspectingly looking in the other direction. So I did like the symmetry of this thumbnail and having a little bit of a stealth kind of feeling to this illustration. For the 7th sketch, I was then thinking about, well, what if the lunchbox was actually a Spider-Man, Spider Lunchbox, and he was shooting out a web, and on that web was a bunch of little spiders who were crawling around. And then for the last thumbnail here, I thought about having two spider friends hang out in Lunchbox, and they're both tiny farmers and enjoying a nice little afternoon soiree while snacking on some bits of watermelon and cheese and other fun, yummy stuff. So I think I decided that the sketch that I really enjoyed was the giant spider scene, and so this was either thumbnail number 3 or thumbnail number 5, but in this case it was thumbnail number 5. And what I started to do here is to use an HB pencil to do a sketch and map out how I wanted the layout and the dimensions of this illustration to be. So just working out some of the proportions and some of the gestures here. Here I'm using just a black HB pencil to lay down these lines, and then I've created another layer on top of this and used a different color here to look at some of the accessories or some of the shapes that can go on top of the spider. So here I'm mapping out the farmer's hat, the carriage, or this massive lunchbox that is on the back of a spider, and some of the fruits that the let's call it a spider farmer carriage person, what this creature is walking around town selling to her customers here. So at this stage I'm pretty happy with just the indicative shape and the direction where this is going, and so I've reduced the opacity of the illustration down a bit and create a new layer on top of that. And I'm using a slightly different brush now, so I'm using the Studio Pen, which is a bit more of a clean aligned fine liner, and I'm going through a first pass of just using this to put a bit more cleanliness to the shapes and the definition of this illustration. Again, because I'm aiming to finish this in about 20 minutes, the quality or the exactness of some of these lines aren't super important to get perfect, but I'm just getting it in a good enough state or in a style that I'm happy with. What I like about this particular style of drawing is that the lines are a little bit cleaner, so you see that this is a slightly different illustration style than some of the previous doodle boxes I've been doing. But when it gets to the coloring aspect, and when it gets to having a few more cleaner lines and blocking out the colors, using the Studio Pen is a really nice way of getting a almost like a cell shaded cartoon effect that is quite easy to change colors around in, and also to manipulate once you get into the later stages of the illustration. You'll see there's a lot of erasing and a lot of undoing as I go through this process. The double tap undo button on Procreate is something that I use quite a lot of, so this is one of the great things about digital illustration that I definitely forget or miss when I'm doing more physical illustrations. I think the habit of double tapping to undo mistakes is something that I definitely take for granted. So here I'm just going and adding in some individual fruit shapes. I've got a big basket of fruits on the back of this giant spider. Is this a popular way to buy fruit? I'm not sure, but in this particular world I think it's a very trustworthy face. She's got a super friendly smile, so I don't see why people should discriminate where they buy their fruit from, whether it's a normal shop or a giant spider with bananas and apples in their hands. So the color palette for this particular illustration, I started to think of a more jaffle colored combination, so I do tend to pick two very neutral colors and two complementary colors that pop a little bit. So here I've selected two warm grays to be the skin color of the spider, and using a combination of yellow and orange just to bring some of the fruits, some of the hats and shoes a bit more to life and to contrast against the greys that I've chosen here. So as you can see, I'm doing a technique where I'm just dragging the colors in between the lines, so it's a very simple, almost paint bucket fill that I'm using here. And for a few of the smaller shapes, because they're not as cleanly defined in the way that I've drawn them, I do create a layer underneath that and start to create some shapes that I can fill relatively easily. I've added in purple here as another color to use, and just using that to provide some variation with some of the grapes and some of the fruits. So as you can see, it's a pretty simple illustration at the moment. There's not a lot of layers there. I'm doing a bit of manipulating and shaping of some different elements, but now I'm at the stage where I'm pretty happy with the colors. I'm creating one more layer on top of this and using a different brush now, just the HB pencil, to give a bit more of a rougher kind of feel. When you are using very clean lines and block colors, it can sometimes feel very clinical in the way that the illustration comes to life. So I think it's important to just use a different textured brush to bring out some of the, let's say, imperfections in the illustration. Well, that brings us to the close of episode 4 of Doodlebox. Thank you so much for watching. I hope you enjoyed today's episode where I brought a spider, farmer, and lunchbox prompt together to create the illustration that you see in front of you. If you like this episode and want to see more, please subscribe to my channel to keep up to date with the latest content and to look at some of the past episodes I have done. Leave some comments in the section below. I'd love to hear from you on what other ideas you might have, other combinations you'd be interested in seeing, and any questions that you might have for me. Thanks again for tuning in. Look forward to making the next video and have a wonderful day. Bye.